My name is Eric Shelton. The date is October 4th, 2018, and I'm about to do my informative speech. Imagine you're sitting in the crowd in a packed arena, waiting eagerly for the band to come on stage. The arena goes dark, and you know that the time has come. When the lights come back on, there they are, the band you paid to see. After the concert, you wonder how anything will ever top this experience. Today we'll look at just how the rock and roll genre of music has changed throughout each decade from the 1960s to the 1990s. While many people who casually listen to the music are aware that the music has evolved, many are not entirely sure of how it changed or of how much it has changed. However, once the change has been pointed out to them, the listener is often very more appreciative of the content they listen to. Throughout the past 50 years, rock and roll has been one of, if not the most popular style of music. But in that same amount of time, the music itself has changed quite a bit, especially in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. To begin with, rock music began to hit its stride with mainstream audiences in the 60s due to the new style of the genre that was introduced. According to Steve Pearson's article, Popular Music in the 60s, some of the most popular styles of music in this time were British invasion rock, folk rock, and hard rock. British invasion was the most popular style of these, mainly due to the amount of star power that the genre had. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones were two of the most popular British invasion style artists and two of the most popular artists of all time. In 1969, the Beatles released their extremely popular Abbey Road album. Yet, according to the article UK Album Release Abbey Road, the album sold 4 million copies in the first week and another million by year's end. In the mid-60s, the Beatles held a tour in the US. On the tour, they had a concert at Shea Stadium in New York. At this concert, there were over 55,000 people attending, and it was one of the highest grossing concerts of all time, amassing $304,000. In 1968, the Rolling Stones released their album Beggar's Banquet. On this album is one of the most popular songs ever recorded by the Rolling Stones, Sympathy for the Devil. This was one of the many albums that the Rolling Stones released in the 60s, and was part of the reason that they were the biggest competitions that the Beatles had in this time. Under the hard rock style, Led Zeppelin was one of the most popular bands in this time, and their music is still listened to today. In late 1969, Led Zeppelin released one of their most popular albums with Led Zeppelin II. According to Neil McCormick in his article, Led Zeppelin's Albums, many people consider this album to have set the framework for the next 10 years of the rock genre. The album sold well, and by the end of the year, it was the third highest rock album in the genre. One of the most popular artists of all time was also a huge star in the 60s. Bob Dylan was the figurehead of the folk rock style and is one of the pioneers of rock music. In 1965, Bob Dylan released his extremely popular Highway 61 Revisited album, which quickly rose to the top of the charts. This album is home to one of Dylan's most popular songs, Like a Rolling Stone. Bob Dylan is certainly one of the most influential artists of all time, with many bands from later decades performing covers of his top hits. Next, new styles became mainstream in the 1970s and 80s that kept the fans hooked on the product of rock music. Progressive rock, new wave, and hair metal were three of the most popular styles throughout the 70s and 80s. Progressive rock came into the forefront of mainstream audiences throughout the 70s and quickly had new bands that gained popularity. One of these was Pink Floyd. In 1973, Pink Floyd released the most popular album of the entire decade with their album The Dark Side of the Moon. According to the article, Billboard chart record breakers, The Dark Side of the Moon set the record for longest time spent on the Billboard Top 200 album chart at 861 weeks, which is over 16 years. In the style of new wave, the most popular artist was David Bowie. Bowie burst on the scene in the 70s and took the entire music industry by storm with his unique style of music. In 1972, he topped the charts with his album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. This album is considered as one of the most revolutionary albums of all time. Hair metal burst onto the scene in the 1980s and quickly became a fan favorite. In 1981, legendary artist Ozzy Osbourne released his second solo album, Diary of a Madman. Rolling Stone ranks this album as the 15th best metal album of all time. Another top metal band of the 1980s was AC/DC. In 1980, they released their extremely popular Back in Black album. Back in Black has sold more than 40 million copies, making it one of the top-selling metal albums of all time. Finally, the genre of rock music changed significantly in the 1990s with the new styles which became popular. These styles were alternative and grunge rock. The Red Hot Chili Peppers became one of the most popular alternative rock style bands in the 90s. In 1999, they released their album Californication. On this album is one of the most popular songs, which is actually named after the album, and it is one of the main reasons that this album became so popular. In the grunge style of rock, Nirvana was the top band. Nirvana burst onto the scene in 1991 when they released their extremely popular album, Nevermind. This album quickly topped the charts for the year and stayed there until year's end. It also finished second in the top albums of the 90s. In conclusion, throughout time, rock music has been some of the most popular music. During this prominent time for rock music, the music itself changed a lot in the different styles and subsequently the popular albums and bands. This was especially evident in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and the 90s. The thing that all the different styles of rock music have in common is that they all left an impact on culture worldwide and impacted millions of lives for the better. Thank you.